call the honourable member for McMahon.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, for the last month, the Australian people have had the spectacle of a government in denial. No budget in living memory has been rejected so comprehensively by the Australian people as this budget has been. And yet the government simply just doesn't get it. We saw the Treasurer defensively and plaintively giving a speech last week calling for understanding, explaining to the Australian people that really the budget is very fair. And the Treasurer seems pathologically incapable of understanding the Australian people's anger over this budget. But the truth is, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Australian people understand this budget better than the Treasurer does. They understand that it's fundamentally an unfair document. They understand that it is fundamentally a document based on deceit, the deceit of the Liberal and National parties at the last election. We see the Treasurer arrogantly lecturing people in a way that makes Peter Costello look humble, arrogantly lecturing people about the need for cuts, about the difference between lifters and leaners. We see this Treasurer telling people that the age of entitlement is over, saying that he's astounded at the reaction of people who don't approve of Australia's patients being forced to pay $7 to go to the doctor if they are sick. He's astounded by the reaction, he says. Yet at the same time, we see that he doesn't even understand the details of his own policy. We saw him on the ABC a few weeks ago, just after the budget, fundamentally getting the details wrong about his own budget and then not even having the good grace to admit it when asked about it in this House. Now, I've seen some speculation about members opposite off the record saying the Treasurer is not selling the budget very well. Well, I concede that he's not a very good salesman of the budget, but the problem goes much deeper than that, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is fundamentally a bad budget. We know it's a bad budget for families. We know it's a bad budget for pensioners. We know it's a bad budget for the unemployed. We know it's a bad budget for apprentices. We know it's a bad budget for university students or people who aspire to go to university. We know it's a bad budget for all those people. But it's fundamentally a bad budget for Australia. Yeah. It's fundamentally a bad budget for the Australian economy. It's the wrong budget for our times. It's a budget driven by a stale and sterile ideology, not by any deep thought about the needs of the Australian economy at this time. Now, the Treasurer says, and I agree with him because I've said it. I said it when I was the Treasurer, that Australia needs a plan to deal with the transition away from the investment boom in mining. But this is a budget which does nothing to assist that transition. In fact, makes it worse. It's not a budget which inspires confidence. If we're going to get investment in the Australian economy, right across the economy, not just in the mining sector, we need businesses confident in the future. And to have businesses confident in the future, we need consumers confident in the future. But this budget, of course, has delivered the opposite. Now, of course, the Liberal and National parties had a lot to say about confidence before the election, didn't they? We had the Prime Minister say there'd be an instantaneous adrenaline rush to confidence if he was elected. Well, we haven't seen an instantaneous adrenaline rush. We've seen a Mogadon blanket on confidence, Mr Deputy Speaker, far from what the Prime Minister promised. I mean, this was the most puerile part of the government's, the now government's campaign. The most bankrupt part of their campaign was their campaign around the economy. Just elect us and everything will be all right, they said. The Treasurer said, the now Treasurer said, Australian consumers will unleash their balance sheets on the very election of a Liberal National Party government. Even after the election, he said just after the election, it's going to be a great Christmas, he said, because the Liberal Party is now in charge. Spend up big, he told the Australian people. Well, how's that worked out? We now have consumer confidence 16% lower today than it was on the day that the Liberal and National parties were elected to office in Australia. 16% lower, some adrenaline, some rush to consumer confidence. And what's caused this decline in consumer confidence? Well, it's pretty clear, Mr Deputy Speaker. Just have a look at the June Westpac Consumer Sentiment Survey. Westpac says the index is still very firmly in pessimistic territory. A very high 74% of respondents record news on the budget and taxation, with a wide majority viewing the news as unfavourable. And it gets better, Mr Deputy Speaker. Westpac says That is the highest level of recall for this topic since we began running this survey in the mid-1970s, surpassing those seen during the GST introduction in the year 2000. So this is a budget which has been noticed more than at any time since the records of consumer confidence have been set, and the verdict is clear and the verdict is in. We saw Dun & Bradstreet conduct a survey. The Financial Stress Index has shown financial stress levels increasing by almost a third since the election, by almost a third since the September election. We saw consumer confidence decline and financial stress up. And we've seen another Dun & Bradstreet survey which shows that 59% of Australian businesses believe this federal budget will make it harder for them to conduct their business. 59% of Australian businesses. And it is right across the country, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Western Australia, in the June quarter, we saw only 29% of Western Australians expecting the Western Australian economy to improve over the next 12 months, down from 48% just last December. And this was a survey taken in the lead-up to the federal budget. This was a survey taken when all the speculation was out there about these Treasurer's cuts to services and increases in taxes before they'd become a reality. If this is the implication of the speculation, let us just imagine what the impact of the reality is on consumer confidence. So this is a bad budget when it comes to the economy, because 50% of the economy is made up of consumption, and if you have consumer sentiment so low, so battered by the actions of this Prime Minister and this arrogant and out-of-touch and blustery Treasurer, then you are going to have an impact on the budget. You're going to have an impact on the budgets of the states, and we saw that play out again today in New South Wales, despite the pathetic denials of the Prime Minister at question time. And you're going to have an impact on family budgets. There's no budget emergency, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this government didn't create for the states or for the families of Australia. Their own budget creates budget emergencies right across the country, and it's being reflected in consumer confidence, and it's being reflected in the statements of every state premier and treasurer right across the country. So this is a budget which is fundamentally bad for the economy of today, and it's fundamentally bad for the economy of tomorrow as well, because there are a lot of cuts in this budget which this side of the House objects to, and objects to strongly as unconscionable. But there are some cuts which are just plain dumb, which are short-sighted and which are against our economic advantages as a nation. Cutting $111 million from the CSIRO must be one of the dumbest things any Treasurer has ever done. This is about the future of our nation, about being an innovative economy, about being an economy based on research and science. Heaven forbid, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we could have a government which believes in science. But no. The Prime Minister says, well, this is a modest cut, only $111 million to the CSIRO, he says. Well, Australian businesses and Australian scientists know the importance of science and innovation and research. We've seen the abolition, not the cut, not the shaving, the abolition of commercialisation of Australia. And for every $1 which is invested by the Commonwealth through commercialisation of Australia, we see $2 invested in the private sector gone as a result of this government's policies. We've seen CRCs having an $80 million cut. Geoscience Australia, again, there's those pesky scientists, cut by $16 million. The Australian Research Council, cut by $75 million, all sacrificed on the altar of this government, this Prime Minister and this Treasurer and their stale ideology. The ideology based on a different time, based on the time when the age of entitlement was considered a threat to the Australian people, not when the age of entrepreneurship, the age of science and the age of research and innovation could be embraced for the best interests of the Australian people. There is a need to return the budget to surplus, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the best way to return the budget to surplus is to grow the economy. Is to grow the economy through thinking in a way which embraces innovation and entrepreneurship, not the stale and negative cuts, not the demonisation of fellow Australians which this Prime Minister specialises in, the demonisation of unemployed people, the demonisation, dare I say it, of Australia's pensioners who've done nothing wrong except work hard for their entire working life and pay their taxes, and now are insulted by a Prime Minister of Australia who stands there and denies there are cuts to their pension, who doesn't realise that the pension is the primary source of their income, the way they put food on the table, the way they make small contributions to their family and their grandchildren. No, the Prime Minister just doesn't get it. The Treasurer doesn't get it. They don't get the anger right across Australia, including rural and regional Australia, at their wrong priorities, their warped priorities and their values which are fundamentally rejected by the Australian people.
Order.